Welcome back to the programme. Swedish police have set up a special task force to combat gangs following a wave of violence in cities across the country. On Sunday, a 15-year-old boy was fatally shot in the city of Malmö. The country has seen a dramatic surge in the use of grenades and machine guns in gang-related violence in the last 12 months. Police said last week that they dealt with more than 180 bomb attacks this year alone. Well, joining us for more on this is Therese Cedergreen, who's a correspondent with Swedish national broadcast TV4. Morning to you. Sweden really is a country that has up until now had a real reputation for safety. What's behind this increase in violence?
This has been a big problem in the southern part of Sweden for a long time now. In the last years, about over 30 young men have been killed only in Malmö. And one reason is that the drug selling is a market that many people want to have money from, and the shooting is more raw. They're killing people open on the street, and it's a few. It's not so many who come to judge. Only 3 persons has been in court and have punishment for over these 30 men that have been killed. So the police has a big problem in Sweden right now.
November 24, 2019. Joe here at Simple Life Show. I appreciate everybody for joining me today. I was going through Facebook as I normally do during the morning, just kind of looking at the headlines and stuff like that. I would probably recommend staying away from Facebook, honestly. I know that it's kind of an addiction. I mean, I have a problem with getting into arguments with people about this and that and certain ideologies, and it's just a complete waste of time. Honestly, what kind of prompted this video was a post on Facebook that I saw earlier. I'm just going to go ahead and just mark out the names of the people that posted this just for their own privacy. So there was recently, every year there is I guess it's called a happiest, whatever the happiest countries are. And the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries always get to the top of that list. And if you look at the most recent one, that was actually put out here probably beginning of this year. We can just scroll down here and kind of look at some of the winners here. It looks like that this article doesn't really get into it, but it looks like Finland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland led the 2018 ranking of the happiness report there. Sweden wasn't far behind, placing 9th. Of course, Sweden was usually at the top, but when we're talking about the Scandinavian countries, we kind of lump them all together because they are somewhat similar. They have a similar demographic, similar way of governing the population and their own government and stuff like that. So Finland is at number 1 right now. Sweden is 9th, and I believe the U.S. is 13th or something like that. It's kind of inconsequential, and it's not really the reason why I'm doing this video. So when I'm on Facebook, obviously I have a lot of liberal friends and stuff like that, just simply because of the beliefs that I have, because I am a Reformed Democrat. I still have a lot of Democratic type of ideologies and conservative ideologies. I also have a lot of independent and all different types of stuff. I'm really a mutt when it comes to what I believe in. I believe in the Constitution, the Republic, for which it stands number 1. And that's kind of that's kind of the foundation of where everything sits. Now, when we're talking about Sweden, and we have to really, the first thing that really pops in my mind is Bernie Sanders and AOC and a lot of the squad. And of course, now with the Democratic primaries in full force, they're going to be choosing a candidate here pretty soon. This is really a question that is really on the minds of a lot of people. Are we going to be really choosing a democratic, quote-unquote, socialist, someone that subscribes to the idea of socialism as the catch-all and the cure-all of the evils of capitalism? And I sincerely think that is a possibility. I think that Bernie Sanders does have a good chance of doing that. I think that Biden is really out, even though all the polls say that he's ahead. I just really don't believe in that. the whole poll saying it's really hard to discern what is real and what's not real. What I believe, and the people that I've talked to, and from what I have seen in social media, because that is pretty much the heartbeat of America, because I have a good smattering of different types of people, and what I have seen is that Bernie Sanders is very, very popular, even though he's really old and he's just recently had a heart attack and he doesn't move very well. He does move a little bit better than I would probably say Joe Biden would be. There's a lot of good candidates there that I would prefer over Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or any of the others, but they don't have a shot in hell of getting the nomination. We all know that. Now, of course, if you have been listening to me for any length of time, you'll know that I am a Trump supporter. I will be voting for Trump in 2020, just simply because he's not really done that bad of a job. I mean, yeah, he's not perfect in everything, but he hasn't completely destroyed this country, as some would like you to believe that he has been doing. I believe that the numbers, as far as the economic numbers, they are looking up. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone is having a good time under the Trump administration. Of course, this doesn't mean that there's supposed to be utopia either. This is the United States of America, and we do not have a lot of the social safety nets that a lot of the Nordic and Scandinavian countries do have. But there is a common misconception when it comes to Sweden, and I bring this up just simply because this article says that, sorry, Americans, Norway ranks as number one for liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, this really isn't about Norway, but it's really about Sweden, because Sweden has been in the news a lot lately, and Sweden and all the other Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, they're pretty much all lumped in the same boat. They all are pretty much run the same way. They're not exactly the same, but they have the similar ideologies. Now, when the first thing I really want to talk about is really what is really a common misunderstanding, misconception about a lot of the Scandinavian countries. And I really didn't even really want to do this video because this subject has been done so many times before, and there is a huge misconception about a lot of these Scandinavian countries and whether they're socialist or not. And I'll go ahead and just dispel the notion that they are. They are not socialist countries. They used to be, yes. Sweden, and I'm just talking specifically about Sweden right now. Sweden used to be a socialist country for around 25, 30 years or so. And that was between, the 1970s and 60s, 70s, I guess, up till about the recession of 1990 and 1991 in Sweden, when everything just fell apart and socialism failed. And this is really all you really need to know about it. That Sweden was really good, looking really well. It was in the 1960s and 70s. It was a very, it was a prime location to actually start businesses. IKEA started their business obviously in Sweden, but they actually fled Sweden because of all the socialist taxes. And if you weren't aware of that, then I would suggest that you kind of look into some of the companies that did leave during this time because of a lot of the socialist policies. So Sweden was doing really well during the 60s, 70s, decided they were going to experiment with socialism. And this lasted for about 20, 30 years. And then after that, everything seemed to fall apart in Sweden. Their tax rate went through the roof. Everything was unsustainable. Businesses were falling apart, and all this stuff was happening. And the people really weren't having anything of it. They did not want any part of that, so they wanted to go back to a more of a capitalist type of system that would solve a lot of these issues that they were having. So Sweden actually went back to a capitalist system, which we see right now. And when you hear people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and other candidates like that are telling us that we really need to kind of mimic what Sweden has been doing and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't really hold any water, because Sweden did agree that socialism was not working. And in fact, as it is reading here, was a disaster. Some of the government programs were unsustainable. Some of the policies were absurd, and the tax system was perverse. Norberg said, quoting a Swedish social democratic finance minister, the 30-year experiment was a brief interlude of failure. To reform and save the economy, Sweden reverted back to its capitalist structure, which it had before. It reduced public spending by a third, demolished taxes on the property and inheritance, and so on and so forth. So when you hear a lot of these millennials say that they really want the United States to be like Sweden, well, we already are like Sweden. We do have a lot of social nets and welfare-like structures that are safety nets for a lot of people. So there's nothing really what we need to do. We also need to understand that Sweden is a very homogenous nation. At least it used to be. Back before a lot of the migrants and the refugees came in, it was like 90% white. It was 90% white with about a 2 to 3% unemployment rate. It was probably one of the happiest places to be. Now I'm not so sure if that's really the case. So when we really look at Sweden, we have to, and I don't know if you're really aware of this. I wasn't even aware of this, but there is a lot of violence going on in Sweden. It's not just bombing, but it's also sex crimes and stuff like that. Of course, the sex crime rate has gone up dramatically in Sweden, and this is something that we really need to pay attention to. Now, not only that, the total overall crime per 100,000 citizens has going up. Now, of course, Sweden has less of a population. Now, the entire Scandinavian countries as a whole is probably only about 40 million, which is around, I don't know, what is that, 12, 13% of the population of the United States. So making a lot of generalizations about not only crime, but also the happiness of Sweden versus the United States. And when we make a lot of these comparisons, it really does not translate that well, because we're talking about two different types of demographic societies. Now, Trump has been getting a lot of flack, and he's been getting a lot of flack for over years for trying to shut down the border. And a lot of the millennials and the liberals out there are screaming that he's really racist, right? Now, before Trump ever took office in 2017, the Nordic countries, Scandinavian, specifically Sweden, they were really kind of doing the same thing. And I think this is something that a lot of people are not really paying attention to. So if we're looking at Sweden here with the immigration, back in 2016, before Trump actually took office, before he had a chance to actually put any regulations in, Sweden said no more. They pretty much shut down the border, and they shut down their bridge, in other words, that refugees were crossing over into Sweden. So they shut that down and actually toughened a lot of the regulations and rules of people actually entering the country. And the problem really is that because the unemployment rate was so low, that's not really the way that it is anymore in Sweden. Right now, the unemployment rate in Sweden has gone through the roof. And for the older population, it's not so much bad. Of course, they might have retired and stuff like that. Of course, we have to really look at why Sweden and the Scandinavian countries were so successful 50 years ago and why they still are successful now. It's because for two main reasons. Number one, right now, they have reverted more to an open capitalism type of environment. Yes, they still have their social safety nets, but so do we. Okay, we are a larger nation. We are more diverse. We have more freedoms, and therefore, we can't really compare the two because they're two completely different nations. We would not be able to mimic, but exactly what Sweden is doing right now because we wouldn't want to. So the unemployment rate has gone through the roof. Now, some of this has to do with this is kind of twofold type thing. Some of it has to do with a lot of the refugees coming in that have not been assimilating, that are not able to actually find work. In fact, the unemployment rate among refugees, working age men, would be somewhere between 20 to 25%. So this has been really something that Sweden has been struggling with for quite some time now. And that is one of the reasons why they have kind of shut down the border, in other words, to a lot of immigration for refugees. Now, this isn't entirely because Sweden is just a racist country, just like the United States is not a racist country. It just means that a lot of the countries that have been taking a lot of the refugees in, such as Sweden, such as Germany and France, they have been doing the same things. They have been saying no more, or let's just put heavy regulations on this. So when a lot of the liberals over here want to constantly be looking at Sweden and a lot of Scandinavian countries as something to mimic, well, they are basically mimicking us, because we are doing the right things with our borders. We are taking care of our own citizens instead of just opening the floodgates and instituting a socialist system that will not be sustainable. We've already seen this. We only need to look to Sweden to understand this and to prove that it does not work. Sweden tried this for 20 to 30 years. After 20 to 30 years, they could not sustain it anymore. Everything was falling apart. So what's happening in Sweden right now? What's happening in Sweden right now is really dangerous. Sweden, and a lot of the Scandinavian countries, they're not safe to be in, because not only the bombings have gone up, but also the young people have been, they've started to actually embrace a dictatorship. And this is something that is really, really something that we need to pay attention to, because we see the same things over here. We're seeing that a lot of the young people are reverting from a capitalist, a free, open market society mindset. And I'll go ahead and pause right here to just make a side note that I am not talking about crony capitalism. I'm not talking about corruption. This is not something that I'm not in favor of huge banks controlling everything. I am completely against the Federal Reserve. I think the Federal Reserve needs to go. I think there's a lot of bad things with this country that needs to change. But we don't need to jerk the wheel hard left into a socialist society. This is not something that is going to work here. And it's going to fall apart even faster than it fell apart in the Scandinavian countries, specifically Sweden. So something has really been happening over there in Sweden. Basically, they are starting to get into the same mindset that a lot of the nationalists over here are starting to get that mindset. They are tired of the endless supply of welfare. Now, I am not against welfare. I am not against helping people who truly need it. However, I am against just having an open state where we just start giving money to people for no reason. And what all that's really going to do is it's going to foster an environment where people come to rely on that, and their whole work ethic is completely destroyed. Now, I also will make another side note that one of the great things that Sweden is doing, along with all the other Scandinavian countries, they are doing a lot when it comes to their work ethic. And this is something that isn't anything new. Okay, this is something that has been something that has been part of their culture for a long, long time. Some of the Northern Europeans have always been known for being the hardest workers on the planet. And this is something that I want to kind of talk about just for a second, because I think there is a huge problem, not only in this country, in the United States, but also in other countries as well, such as Japan and China and other places like that, where the workers are literally worked to death. And we are dying so soon because we are literally working to death, because we have this idea that we are supposed to have everything. We are supposed to consume everything. Now, this is a Democrat coming out in me, because I'm not a complete conservative just as much as I'm not a complete Democrat either. But this is a liberal coming at me, and it's not so much a liberal philosophy, but this is just common sense. That if you have shorter hours that the population is working, they will naturally be more productive. Now, will they be paid less? Probably not, because here, think about it this way. Even though you're losing 2 hours a day, what's going to end up happening is that if your workforce is more productive and they're actually getting more work done, guess what? The company's going to make more money, and you're probably going to get paid more. Okay. And this is just something that I think we really need to look at, even in this country. We have this philosophy of just work, work, work until you die. Literally until you die in front of you, on your keyboard, in front of your wherever you're at, just fall down dead. And that's what's happening to a lot of people. They're completely stressed out. They never have any vacation. They never take any time for themselves. And this is a huge problem in this country. I think it's something that we do need to look at to Sweden for, because I think that will help out the mentality of a lot of the people that work in this country. It will create and will foster an environment where we're more civic and we're more social with everybody. I think that staying away from social media is one of the hugest things that we can do, at least limiting it to only the necessities and stuff like that. Just mindless arguments online is completely a waste of time, and we need to stop that. And our work week needs to be shorter. We need to be working less, but we need to be more productive at the same time. And I think we need to look at the Swedes are doing. They're doing this in a lot of different ways, specifically by just instituting more time management. Time management is something that's so hugely important, not only in Sweden, but this country, but every country, because the more time we waste, the less productive we get and the more stressed out we are. And, the whole domino effect goes. And this, of course, leads to obesity. It leads to a lot of health problems. And, of course, this puts more strain on the health system as a whole. So if we can actually work on time management and actually lowering our work hours to make stuff a little bit better for our employees, the employees out there that work for any kind of industry, this is going to actually make people happier. And I think this is what's actually resulting in a lot of the happiness, because people have more time to spend with their families. They have more time to work on personal projects and goals and self-reflection, or maybe just fishing, and there's, I think this is something that we can really learn from. So this is, this is really something that I really thought that it was important to actually bring up and talk about, because it's something that is not so cut and dry. That's, the Nordic countries are bad, and they're not, they're complete hellholes or anything like that, and don't believe what you hear. I'm sure they're fine countries, but I think that the countries, the Scandinavian countries, have come around to a more capitalist type of way of running their country. I think they're actually probably using the capitalist system better than the United States is using, and that's why we probably need to look to them to actually run the capitalist system better in this country. We do not need to look to them to do socialism, because they don't have socialism over there. They have a more restriction-free type of capitalist system. You could call it more of a democratic capitalism than it would be a more democratic socialism. I don't believe a democratic socialism even works. It is a misnomer. It does not exist. Democratic socialism does not exist. What they're referring to, Bernie Sanders and the like, AOC, they are referring to a democratic type of capitalism, where it's more of a hands-on approach. Government kind of steps back, but it also puts a lot of restrictions in there, so it helps the population and the companies grow in a way, because it facilitates growth instead of restricts growth. So this is all I'm really going to say on that. This is a very wide topic. I think that is something that is worth debating. I think it's something that's worth really looking into and talking about. Because the whole thing of, United States should be like Sweden and all that stuff, it's not so cut and dry. It really isn't. So until next time, this is Joe with Simple Life Show. I hope you have a great day and a good Thanksgiving, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.